you. It's my pleasure to be here. I want to provide a little bit of context for those of you who don't know me or my work before I got started. So I began studying this intersection between emerging technologies, religion, and digital culture back in the dark ages of the internet, circa 1995. And that was when I was doing my PhD at the University of Edinburgh. And I was one of the first people in the world to do kind of theology and technology in the digital age. And my major was, I worked between computer media communications and theology. And I was kind of really early in those days, kind of singled out as this person that didn't quite fit anywhere in my studies. One of my supervisors was in the psychology of AI department. I had another supervisor in the sociology of technology department. And then my main supervisor was in the theology faculty. And I had kind of study spaces in all those spaces, though my main place was in theology. And, whenever I would go to those places, they're like, "You're studying what? The internet and religion and the church." And so this has been, it's a fun, to kind of look 25 years on in the process to see how that religion and especially theological sectors have really kind of engaged and embraced the need to kind of reflect on these key questions of what it means to be human in the digital age, of what, as we're becoming wrapped in media, what does that mean for our church practice as well as how we understand what it means to be religious in a contemporary society. And so when I got the invitation for this conference, immediately that word Techno-Sapien jumped out at me because I hadn't seen that word in a long time. And I remember the first time I saw that word, and it was circa 1993 in a book that sat for about 2 years on my desk as a PhD student. It was called Cyberspace First Steps. It was a collection of cyber philosophy. And in the introduction of that book, they use this word Techno-Sapien as this coming transmutation of humanity. And how would we, in the area of philosophy and philosophy of technology, begin to prepare and think about how computers might shape our world, how virtual reality was going to become a commonplace thing. In 1993, that was a pretty radical idea. But, as we've already heard, most of us are cyborgs in the kind of early stages form with, our extensions. And, our technologies really have become an extension of us. And so, in that kind of, when I was thinking about what I could talk about, I thought I could talk about my postdoc work on the post-human, and but I realized that, well, that's one thing, but that doesn't really kind of embrace the whole idea of kind of the digital neighbor. And then I thought about the other book that sat next to me, that book on my desk, and that was The Way Ahead. It was a Bill Gates autobiography. And there was a quote in that book that I often quoted when I gave presentations, especially when I was trying to defend why I was studying this area that I was studying in a Scottish theology faculty. He talked about how the internet, and this is again circa 1995, had this potential to unite us if we choose, or further separate us from each other if we choose. And I think that really kind of sums up, especially the relationship between religion and technology. Similar to discourses in science and religion, there seems to be something antithetical or kind of in conflict of religion and technology. It seems the created order and the spiritual order coming into kind of conflict. But on my desk, between those two books, was my Hebrew Bible that I had to, for my Hebrew classes that I was taking as part of my theology degree. And, I kind of saw that as this kind of that bridge of kind of, okay, between the world of kind of what could be, what the philosophy of technology says, and what, these kind of early internet prophets were saying about how we were going to use technology and the potential to either unite or divide us, sits the scripture, sits the Rhema word, and what does he have to say? What does God have to say about this, rather than what are we going to listen to, just a human or worldly wisdom? And so, kind of in my research over the last 25 years, I've tried to kind of grapple with those questions of both how religious communities use technology, as well as kind of how our understandings of what it means to be human and spiritually changed in a digital society. And so it's kind of with that that background, I want to present my work today. I also want to start with a couple assumptions. So I'm presenting on a study that's the basis of my current book project, which is called When Internet Memes Are Mean. And I want us to kind of do a thought experiment. A thought experiment in academia is the idea that you're going to step into a certain set of conditions and beliefs. And even if that might be kind of uncomfortable, you're going to see where that takes us. So So one assumption is that we are wrapped in this mediated world, and that's not always a comfortable world. Learning to understand how that technology shapes how we see others, as well as how we treat others, is a really important part of this question that we're looking at in this conference. Another assumption is built into that space is that, digital spaces are where many people, and especially young millennials and Generation Z, they encounter religion. They don't encounter religion because they go to a synagogue or a church. They encounter Rabbi Google or Pastor Google and ask him questions. Oftentimes, I talk to students and they meet people of other religious faiths online first before they actually have a face-to-face connection. And these digital spaces mediating our experiences of the other becomes important spaces of how they see religion. And the third one is that one thing that, getting back to that quote of Gates, is that the internet can either encourage, bring us together, or divide us. Unfortunately, we live in a world where especially our discourse and our talk online is very uncivil and very vitriolic when it comes to religion. How do we deal with this hostility of discourse? And how does the mediation of the screen especially kind of draw down people's inhibitions and create kind of an openness, but also a space that is highly contested and highly problematic? And what happens when people in the religious faith in the Christian community are also being influenced by that kind of space? That's the kind of issues I want to look at today. So, what my argument I'm starting out with in this specific presentation is that internet memes are a great way to study how people look at religion and how they think about religion in a digital world, a digital context. And when I use the word religion, what I'm using is the concept of lived religion. So we could talk about religion in terms of different world religious traditions. We could talk about it in relation to religious communities or official religions coming out from an organization. Lived religion is a concept in religious studies we use to talk about how people interpret and live out religion in daily lives, and how that influences how they see the world. And a lot of scholars like myself who study digital culture and digital media have found that the kind of religion gets talked about online is this lived religion. It's not really the official definitions, it's how people use media to present their faith or their beliefs, both from insiders' perspectives and outsider perspectives. So this research that I'm presenting looks at how common messages about internet memes communicate religion, especially this lived understanding, in the context of Islam. Because oftentimes it's easier to kind of talk and look at the kind of framings of a religion outside our own community and be critical of it in that way. I'm also going to look at how memes promote certain stereotypes online and how that comes about. And I'm going to look at the implications of treating the religious other neighborly online. And I also want to give credit where credit is due. I've been studying internet memes for about 6 years, and it's been with the help of my many student research teams that I brought together and collaborated with. So this particular bit of data, it comes from my helpers, Samantha Morgan and Lane Joyner, who now have graduated A&M and gone on to bigger and better things, but were kind of key in helping me look at kind of especially Jewish and Muslim framings and stereotypes through internet memes online. So in my book that are co-authored with Stephen Gardner, Network Theology, we look at 3 areas of this idea of neighborliness. And so we look at how, who is my neighbor in a digital age? We talk about where is my neighbor and where do they live in this, what is this digital space? And then finally, we explore how do we treat our neighbor online? And it's this kind of third question that I want to focus on today in my presentation, that we find ourselves in midst of these new relationships and engagements in this mediated spaces called, the internet. And how does that basically impact that call to treat our neighbors and treat ourselves? If we're wrapped in media, what is a new social and communicative context, and has the call to treat people neighborly changed or not? And so I'm looking at the idea of how do we kind of look at, especially the religious other, somebody who shares kind of a sense of a common worldview, but has a different kind of interpretation of where that leads in a meta-narrative. And how do we treat them in these places? And what do we especially do when those narratives about the religious other encourages us not to love our neighbor online and not to treat them neighborly? So a few kind of background concepts. First, what is a meme? I'm talking about them in terms of internet memes, but a meme is a concept that was developed by Richard Dawkins in his book, The Selfish Gene. And he was using kind of biological terminology as a way to kind of describe how ideas emerge in society. So for him, a meme was just an idea that somehow is easily understood by others and can be spread throughout a culture. So at the very sense. And so, memes are these kind of, they can be could be a song, it could be a fashion trend, it could be a statement or a slogan that gets kind of spread. In the age of the internet, these memes have kind of taken on a specific character. They're both textual and visual. They're an online form of communication, and they use images to kind of talk in this very kind of short narrative. So memes become an important way to kind of look at not just religion, but politics, social trends, and even just how people see celebrity in our culture. They showcase kind of how people also memes or ideas get spread through culture. One of the fun parts about studying memes is that that they're very fluid and creative. If you have access to the internet and you have about 60 seconds, you can create a meme through a meme generator online. There's many different onlines. But because of the nature of this digital communication, is that it's really hard to track down who the author is. And so these memes in some ways are the perfect postmodern text. It doesn't matter what the author says, it's how is it experienced by the audience? It's this idea of participatory culture. What is the meaning that's made out of it, and what is the meaning that changes in its journey? So a couple things that we need to understand about memes before I talk about specific data is, memes about a religion require that we understand the whole culture of memes. So it's important that we understand that, there are a whole set of actually stock characters that have emerged. And I encourage you, if you're really interested in memes, go to knowyourmeme.com. It's kind of the Bible or encyclopedia of memes. And it talks about these different characters, not just kind of where they come from in popular culture, whether they're from a film or a celebrity, or some of these are even homegrown kind of characters that emerge and images and ideas that get emerged online. But it talks about kind of what they stand for. So every meme has a certain kind of archetype or kind of attitude or character that they stand for. Here, it's important to know that this isn't just the actor Sean Beans saying "brace yourself." It's also important to know that this comes from the TV show Game of Thrones. That this is he's representing one of the heads of the tribes, and they say with this famous phrase, "Brace yourself, winter is coming." And so he's kind of standing for this kind of staunch stalwart that we're going to face winter, we're going to be affected by it, but we're going to kind of overpower it. And this this is just one example of a meme that has been used to talk about kind of how the Catholic Church has responded to popular culture, how the Pope has kind of been framed. And so memes are very flexible because you can download the image and the text you want in the same spirit and create certain kind of messages. But also when we're studying religious memes, it's important that we understand there's an element of religious literacy. So like my colleagues that are in the internet studies who study memes, they will know, oh yeah, this is Success Kid. This is a picture that was emerged online. And it's kind of the idea of someone overcoming something that was either hard or seemingly hard, with his little kind of fist there. But loses a rib, gets a wife, unless you understand kind of, this comes from the Bible, and this is kind of a nod to the book of Genesis and the creation story, you won't fully understand, kind of what humor is in here and communicated. So understanding memes is realizing that they can be used for both positive and negative messages. They can be created by both insiders and outsiders. And so also kind of the idea that memes need some interpretation is important. And also, one of the key aspects about memes is memes essentialize religion. And this is actually a meme. When I teach classes on kind of digital culture, my students have to create memes to sum up the arguments of their paper and then explain how this kind of sums it up. This is one of my grad students said that, reduce an entire religion to a single meme. The character from How I Met Your Mother says, challenge accepted. And memes speak in very concise ways, a few words, a single image, but they carry very powerful meaning. And they also are very reductive because of that. They work on stereotypes because, digital culture is that accentuated soundbite culture. It's 40 characters, it's an image, it's, 7 seconds of video. It's about reducing things. And they work because stereotypes work. Stereotypes are based on a bit of truth, but they often get diluted in some ways. So in my research, I've been looking at how internet memes about religion, there's certain kind of genres that have emerged. There's not just stock characters that talk about religion, but there's religious figures like Advice God and Religion Pigeon, who are used especially to critique religion. And also within these kind of certain typologies of the certain kind of styles of religious memes, there also is some certain kind of main frames that are used. There's frames like playful that usually try to use tongue-in-cheek humor or promoting religion, and these are memes often created by insiders. And so there can be positive memes, but overwhelmingly in the kind of 6 years of research, my students and I have found that most memes, when they talk about religion, are coming from an outsider perspective, and they're definitely focusing on the mocking of religion or the questioning. So religion is being seen in meme culture is about undermining the stories. And so some examples, and I apologize in advance, some of the memes that I'm going to show are controversial. They are going to show messages that you might find problematic or offensive. It's not meant to offend you. It's meant to kind of show these are the messages that when my students are trying to Google about what does a Muslim believe, what does a Buddhist believe, this is the stories that they're being told. They're being they're being shown characters like, greedy Jewish man, as a kind of representative of who Jews are in Jewish culture. They're seeing, even questioning memes like Ryan Gosling's Hey Girl memes being turned into ways to kind of undermine kind of faith and that. And so, when we come to the case study of talking about Muslim memes, this is where my research started. One of my students came in one day to say, hey, I've seen that the new characters popped up on knowyourmeme.com. It's Ordinary Muslim Man. He originally surfaced in 2011 and was an individual that kind of went to a stock photo website, found this meme, and he created this I am the bomb at making falafel. So in some ways it seems, this is a meme about religion, but it's kind of playful. It's trying to kind of show, these are some assumptions people have about maybe Islam, but it's trying to show how Muslims can engage with popular culture, how they can be humorous. This meme emerged actually on the 4chan list. And if anyone knows anything about 4chan, it's an online community. They're very kind of hostile and about religion. They've used kind of different ways and techniques to kind of undermine and really kind of critique religion. So that original kind of meme turned into the third picture, which is this variegated background. This is a background used in memes that originated from the advice animal kind of motif. So the idea is that when you see a background like that, that means the idea is this person or this character represents a certain kind of attribute and an attribute one that can be questioned in some way. And so we say, I'm going to blow up an image so you can read the text. So here we have, ordinary Muslim man. He's coming, and we can see that from his ethnic background, he's from a Southeast Asian kind of perspective, but he's seen to kind of represent all of Muslims. He's kind of showing in a very humorous way, kind of like challenging the stereotype, but yet we know because of the advice animal kind of background, it's a way of kind of questioning, is he really, is this really kind of tongue-in-cheek, or is this a narrative that actually is the truth? And so reading memes kind of faces us with all these assumptions. And what my overall argument in my paper and in my research is showing that even when memes are attempting to kind of question and kind of play with kind of narratives about identity, they often end up kind of affirming, especially the negative perspective. So in this study specifically, my students and I spent a semester looking at the common stereotypes that were presented by about Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Catholicism and Mormonism through internet memes. We use some Google searches, and I can talk about the methodology that we use specifically. But the main emphasis, what we wanted to see is what are the 3 most common stereotypes that are communicated about memes, and these being the memes that are kind of showing up in top Google searches and especially on Facebook and Twitter. And we found through this kind of research that that all of these stereotypes were ones that question religion and undermine. And so I want to show you kind of some of those narratives that kind of emerge when we talk about Islam. So, what does memes say? So when young people are looking on social media, what kind of messages are being communicated Islam? Well, first is that Muslims are angry Arabs and they're associated with extremist Islam. So one of the things that we see is that when religion gets talked about online, they often are kind of stereotyping the religion with one certain kind of character. It could be a certain ethnicity, it could be a certain kind of cultural group, but that they're very reductive. They're kind of trying to say, okay, this religion is stood by this particular kind of character, and that individual has a certain kind of cultural narrative or set of cultural beliefs, i.e. Muslims are very political and they're associated with political extremist Islam. So we see a lot of, what Edward Said would say is Orientalism. It's basically putting kind of, Muslims in a box that says that even though there may be a diversity of cultures, a diversity of ethnic backgrounds, they all represent one ethnic group. And that ethnic group has, in some ways, an identity that is seen as antithetical to the outsider, that they have character qualities and behaviors that are going to be seen as problematic. And so, these narratives we see are kind of reinforced through kind of these popular memes that show up on Facebook. Another key stereotype in the memes we found is that, Muslims is abusive to women. And this is not a new narrative. We have seen this before in other people who have studied Islam and the media and how it gets framed. But the idea here that's most problematic is not that just that Muslim women are in some cases are oppressed, but that Muslim women have no voice, that there's no alternative narrative, and the religious significance is that the veil is associated with a moral belief as well as a cultural belief. And that, me oppressed, look at the stuff my husband lets me do. It's basically putting kind of a religion in a very Western context and not trying to understand kind of the cultural practices and even religious practices related to maybe the choices that some women might freely make in kind of wearing the veil. And the third stereotype that gets communicated through the memes that we found in our study is that Muslims are anti-American and violent towards U.S. cultural religious beliefs. It's critiqued as Islam is shown as a religion of peace, but these memes will kind of emphasize how that is not true, or fail to kind of give any nuanced understanding of what is meant by peace. And what's problematic here is that these stress that not just that Islam is problematic, but that it's anti-American and it is against kind of American cultural values. That there's no way that there's a connection between the faith of Islam and the faith of Americans. That they are, and also that the religious outsider is an expert at kind of basically telling us who they are. It kind of silences the Muslims from being able to tell their own story. So I've gone over these kind of quite quickly here, but what I'm trying to kind of show is that, when we look at these narratives that going to get put online, that these memes expose biased assumptions and negative viewpoints about Islam online. And this is not just about Islam, but religion in general. That memes, predominantly, at least the ones that are most popular and will be circulated online, speak on the voice of a religious outsider. So there are plenty of websites or Facebook groups, and we've studied those that are pretty, where there's religious memes being produced, or even memes being produced by people who are Muslim or Jewish or Christian, as a way to kind of provide an alternative narrative. But these get less traffic and less kind of spread on the internet. And so religious insider memes are there, and they seek to discredit the stereotypes and promote alternative narratives. But because they're less visible, it's seen as, well, then this is actually a counter narrative to what the standard narrative is. It's not the norm. So where does this leave us? Where does this short glimpse at kind of Muslim memes kind of tell us about neighborliness in a digital era? Well, what I argue in the kind of memeing of the religious other is that if we look back to how do we treat our neighbor online, that there's a call for recognition in digital culture of neighbors and neighborhoods that demand radical acknowledgement of the humanity presence that we encounter in both physical and virtual worlds. It refuses to remove the presence of God from those virtual neighborhoods and treat our physical and virtual neighbors with love and justice. So unfortunately, if we go back to that saying of Bill Gates, the internet has encouraged in many spaces tribalism and tribalistic voices, very closed narratives, very negative views of the other in more contexts. People and research has also shown on digital technologies and tools that often the biases of offline culture have been embedded in tools. Research has shown that, like in Google Translate, there's negative views of African Americans and Asians built into the kind of how the language gets translated and how they privilege certain kind of words and framings and interpretation. That the digital tools that were supposed to kind of create this space of openness oftentimes just create the biases of their creators. And so digital culture isn't kind of a level playing field, unfortunately, in many spaces. So, what do we do with the memeing of the religious other? These memes can be seen as what I would call, or people in a sociological context would call, microaggressions. So that's an act of unkindness against another through word or through deed. That by just kind of being circulated and by being spread online, we are actually reinforcing these stereotypes, even when they're put up as a space for just humor, or I'm just sharing this because a friend shared this. And also these memes reveal that there's a deeper cultural perceptions about the religious other, that digital spaces is not often fighting the stereotypes that we find problematic, and in many cases, it's reinforcing it. That means that if we as Christians are going to be active in the digital space, we can't just share and spread like everyone else. We need to be critical consumers of the media, because sharing isn't always caring, especially when it comes to these kind of products. That memes could be a chance for teachable moments and expose bias and stereotypes. So I use a lot of these memes and the popular memes to talk about kind of what is, from a religious perspective, what is the truth here, what is the falsity here, and what is the editorializing or kind of opinion interpretation here. I read an anti-Muslim meme. Now I'm an expert in Islam. Again, memes show truth even in the negative side, but it's a very editorial and problematic truth oftentimes. And also what I would say is that memes create a space in need of conversation for the other. That it becomes a space where we can call prejudice into question. That I would argue that memes become this place where we can talk about, this is what the popular assumptions are about, especially Islam in American culture. In what ways does that kind of, not just dehumanize these people, but dehumanize all people because of the narratives they think. And lest you think that, I use the case of Islam and that, we've seen through the news that there is a problematic, segment of, Muslim faith, and, there is extremism. But this is the same way that Christianity gets treated online. So most of my colleagues, if they would say, what is Christianity? Well, this is what they think Christianity is. White Christian terrorist, he's obviously not a real Christian, because brown Muslim terrorist, he's a Muslim. But, we have Kirk Cameron, speaking from one sector of American Christianity, and the hat he's wearing is from a character called Scumbag Steve. So by putting Scumbag Steve's hat on Kirk Cameron, now they not just normalize that basically this represents kind of all of Christianity or voice, but it's a voice that is kind of based on someone to be despised and someone to be rejected. Another image I would say is that, when I talk to people, my colleagues or especially at a state sector university, I go, give me a meme that kind of sums up what you think Christianity is. this is the one they most often will pick, Republican Jesus. What would Jesus do? He would feed the hungry, care for the sick, shelter the homeless, and love everyone. But Republican Jesus would cut food stamp benefits, affordable health care, demonize the homeless, and block equity rights. And so the stereotyping has a problematic because it frames, not just one faith tradition, but many faith traditions in this negative light, and assuming that all people fit into this one particular box. So in the book project that I'm working on, I'm almost done with the first half of the book that kind of documents these problems. Where do we go from here? Well, I'm in the process of trying to write up that narrative, and I'll be doing that in the months ahead. But I want to just give you, as a way to sum up some of the kind of introductory kind of challenges or kind of places of conversation I think that we can go to begin to look at and valuing the religious other. So I commend to you Matthew Kimmick's Christian Hospitality and Muslim Immigration in the Age of Fear. He's a Fuller grad, and it's written this great book on the idea, how do we treat Muslims as part of within the Christian community and treat them with respect and care. And, he says, we've talked about kind of my project together, and he says, memes could provide this alternative counter call. Memes can run counter, as they are, run counter to the Christian call to hospitality and treating this danger in our midst with respect and care. But they could become moments of kind of drawing awareness of these narratives, and kind of, the shock of them can kind of shake us into a point of saying, how do we change and offer an alternative narrative, not just online, but in the way we treat the religious other? So for me, I really see that reading religion and internet memes requires this, what's called in academia, an action research approach. We're really good, like what I've done. I've spent 30 minutes diagnosing the problem, but academia and academicians aren't really good always about offering answers of where to go. So where am I starting with some answers? I think we need to ask some questions, and kind of when we come in contact with these vitriolic messages, whether they be through memes, Twitter, or other social media methods, we need to be those people that stand up and offer the counter narrative, not just in the condemnation of them, but actually modeling first and then calling out second. We need to ask, what does this message of this digital image in the meme portray or represent? We need to be fluent in digital culture and understand what memes and other forms of digital culture are communicating, often in subtle ways that we miss because we don't understand the language that they speak in. Secondly, we need to understand how do these texts of the meme shape its meaning and express certain assumptions. So what are the assumptions that are being affirmed that not just call out within a certain tradition, but go across traditions and assumptions about the other? And how could we kind of, again, through our reflection as well as our modeling, show a different narrative? And then in what ways should I respond to this meme? How can I do so in a way resisting and spreading religious bias and othering? Again, I think that especially, online, it's hard, we don't want to kind of get into conflict. We don't want to kind of, well, maybe if I just ignore it, it'll go away, or if I just won't share it and that's enough. But I don't think that's enough in a digital age. I think in an era where basically we're becoming more and more divisive as a country, and there's so much religious aggravation and discontent and dissent in the country, that we have to be these kind of prophetic witnesses, and not just how we consume, but how we communicate and in how we kind of model and interact with digital media, and creating positive narratives as well. So it's with that, I just kind of say thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions and comments.